now recording, and I think we are good to go.
Perfect.
Okay, just make sure that it's actually streaming in the group.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think we are.
Hi, everybody. Hi.
All right. Okay, so I'm just going to take a quick moment to introduce you to the group. So the Gleaux group, as I was telling you, this is my group set aside for people that are looking for motivational inspiration and just really exactly as it sounds, the glow up, right? So we share a lot of information, that kind of, helps us to just navigate life. And one of the areas that I thought would be really helpful to dig into is astrology, right? So you and I, we're cousins, for those of you who do not know. This is my cousin Eric of Eric Be Healed. You can find him on Instagram. He is he's an astrologer, a tarot card reader, and I think he's going to tell you everything else that he does. I'm pretty sure that I'm leaving out a few things because he's just an awesome, all-around awesome person. But Eric, I wanted to just bring you on today so we can talk through really what astrology is for those that do not really understand it. A lot of us know our sun sign, but we don't really know anything else, or how we can utilize it in other areas. And then from there, just ask. I'll probably be asking a ton of questions. I know you and I talk about this all the time, but there's just, as you said, there's just so much that I don't know. And so I'll be leaning on you for a lot of information there. But if you could just take it over from here and kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started in astrology and what else it is that you do, we'd love to hear.
All right, cool. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Eric with Eric Be Healed, as my cousin just let you all know. And with that, definitely, I am an astrologer. I'm a tarot card reader. I'm into most things metaphysical. And so essentially metaphysical beyond the physical state, kind of what goes beyond just our physical presence, what's going on with us spiritually, what's going on in somewhat what we consider the outer realms, the celestial realms. That to me has just always been an interest that I've had, probably due to my Scorpio nature. But at the same time, it's definitely been something that I've always been interested in. And I've been studying it as an interest for probably at least 20 years. And I've been doing professional work with it for about the last 2 years. And so with that, it's definitely given me a grounding to be able to better communicate with others and to better assist others on their life path, their life journey. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, my healing depends on how me being able to help other people heal. And so I definitely feel as though when we are able to look at astrology, when we're able to look at, the tarot, and more than just like the horoscope in the back of the newspaper, but generally, or not even generally, but more succinctly understanding like what the movement of celestial bodies and planets, how they have been understood literally for millennia. We're talking hundreds and thousands of years. We were just, before we went live, we were talking about the Vedic system. It goes back several thousands of years. In African spiritual religions, we have, they work off of geomancy, which is the movement of rocks. And so it's definitely something that has, in its own way, appeared across numerous cultures all over the world for thousands of years. And so to me, I'm like, well, there must be something to it. And in my own curiosity, I've definitely found a lot of truth with it. But beyond those things, I also, as Mickey was saying, like I'm definitely into like international studies. I'm a linguist. My languages of fluency are French, German, and Spanish, clearly English. I enjoy traveling. I enjoy intermingling with other cultures. Definitely in my own personal journey, I have, began to help other people in a counseling capacity. So I'm going back to school for counseling in order to be able to work with people with substance abuse issues, and just definitely just doing all that I can and what I call, battling the darkness. This is a battle for us between the light and the dark. And, I'm a warrior for the light. I'm a warrior for, the God consciousness. And so it's like, it's become my personal endeavor to spread light and spread consciousness to as many people as I possibly can. And my primary means of doing it, and that I'll be talking about with you all today, are through astrology, tarot, and other metaphysical practices.
Okay. Okay. So when I asked you to come on, and I appreciate, I do want to say thank you for taking time out of your day. I know that you have your own page and you've got so much going on. So I appreciate you taking some time to even have this chat with us. But, I do recall just, asking what you would like to speak about. And one of the things that you mentioned is really, using astrology to nurture the consciousness. And so, when I heard you say it, I'm like, okay, what does that mean, Eric? Can you give us a little bit of a teaser on what exactly you mean by nurturing the consciousness?
Right. I speak so woo-woo sometimes, don't I? Thank you for being so accepting of my woo-woo talk. To me, consciousness is just, we use the terms all the time like woke, you know what I mean? So right. When I think of a conscious person, I think of a woke person. I think of the third eye being activated. I think of a person being aware of themselves, not only in the body, but in society, and what we would consider to be the microcosm and the macrocosm. Who are we in our communities? Who are we on this planet? What are we in the greater system of, what is it, 7 other planets and other celestial bodies out there? Like, what are we doing here? 8 other planets. What are we doing? And so, like, to me, it's like consciousness is to be awoke, to be awake and to be woke, so to speak. And the way that I look at astrology is a way to awaken, excuse me. So, I mean, definitely, like, as you talked about earlier, like a lot of people are kind of familiar with, say, your sun sign. Most people, and it's likely Scorpio. I'm a Scorpio. A lot of people know what their sun sign is without necessarily knowing, okay, well, what's your rising sign or what's your moon sign? And, what other houses do you have that are in conjunction with one another versus being opposed to one another? And all of those things, to me, become the equations that make us up as people. And so for me to be able to awaken of who I really am, I'm only looking at half of the picture of me if I only know my sun sign. If I can only know that part of me, well, that essentially, like, my sun sign is kind of like sometimes my inner ramblings. But how do I come off to other people? Well, that's kind of something that's taken care of in knowing your rising sign. How do I deal with my world emotionally? That's something that's dealt with in my moon sign. And so it's when we start talking about utilizing astrology in order for us to begin to awaken our consciousness, it's giving us a full picture. Because to me, I think that without necessarily with astrology and without understanding kind of like bigger concepts of the metaphysical part, I think that it's kind of like we have this blurry image of ourselves. Mm-hmm. But as we can somewhat begin to understand like what's going on the inside of us, I think that kind of begins to put the picture into focus a little bit more. And then when we look at kind of like, world events, because it's not just particular to us, but when we understand that countries have a zodiac and they have a natal chart, and we understand that other things beyond just the physical body are all sort of rotating in this system, and this, to me, what I consider to be a scientific system of calculation. Everything to a certain extent becomes affected by the movement, again, of these celestial bodies. So it definitely gives us kind of like not only a time clock that we can kind of work on of what happens when, but definitely it also too begins to give us a sense of enlightenment of this is who I am. This is, these are intrinsic parts of me. These are things that are as natural to me as my skin color, as my hair tone. And when I can begin to recognize those things and know those things, that's where I can begin to foster a sense of love and trust in those things and utilize those things to work for me. And so, I mean, that to me is a part of utilizing astrology as a way to nurture our consciousness, or to nurture a sense of our awakening, and to begin to awaken to who we are in a larger system of other bodies, you know. And so, I mean, I know it's kind of woo-woo. Definitely interject or ask questions as you have them, because you know me, I'm the type of person, I can talk for 2 hours straight.
I do have a question, but I also just wanted to make note that it looks like we have 2 other visitors on the line. And so I'm going to make sure that everyone knows, like, if you have some questions, it's interactive, just like the virtual happy hour, you know, just jump in. This isn't, you know, like an interview or anything. I want to make it as interactive as possible. So if y'all have any questions, or if there's something to come up, don't be shy. I see Kamala on the line, and then I see iPhone 2. So I'm not familiar with iPhone 2. I don't know who that is, but
hey, iPhone 2.
She'll introduce herself here momentarily, I'm guessing.
Hi.
My name is Vivian.
I'm sorry, what was
Hi.
My name is Vivian.
Hi, Vivian.
Hi, Vivian.
Okay, very good. I do know who you are now. Okay, good. So we're good to go. Eric, I have a question for you. So
Cool.
in speaking about you know, using the astrology and really understanding like who you are in the world, can you give me an example of where that has happened for you, where you've, you know, been able to, I guess, get a little bit more peace within yourself by understanding something that came about through your natal chart?
Well, for me, it's like, why have, like, I mean, it goes way back. So it's like, for me, it's just like understanding so much. You know, again, it's like my sun sign of like, well, why do I have these very intense emotions, and why do I seemingly hold on to them for so long? And it's really beginning to understand like, okay, well, this is my Scorpio side of me. And then it's like, but then it's like, there's those times where I think sometimes it's like we almost feel bipolar, because it's like, well, sometimes I feel like this, but then I can also be extremely extroverted and like outgoing and, you know, like uplifting and exhilarated. And where does this come from? And then that's me understanding like, well, I have a rising sign in Sagittarius. And so it's like I'm ruled, like there's a Jupiter energy there. And then it's kind of like, for me, like really getting into the depths of like, sometimes it almost feels as though it's like, well, it's like, am I sluggish to move? Or, you know, it's like, why do I take so long to think about things before I make an action? Well, when I understand that my moon energy is Capricornian, I understand that that's ruled by Saturn. And so like, I can see that. When I had what we call a Saturn return back in 2012, it basically comes around, well, for me, it started in 2012, but when Saturn comes into your sign, it lasts for about 3.5 years. And at that point, I was, again, like I'm not new to this, I'm true to this. So I already knew that I was going to go through a Saturn return. So I could already kind of like begin to anticipate, expect, and resonate with the fact that things would shift, because when Saturn energy comes, it comes with like a vengeance, and it feels like a vengeance sometimes, but really it just uproots. So for me, I just kept going through like these scenarios of like, oh my goodness. And I'm not talking like I lost my wallet, or I'm talking like I was losing jobs. I'm talking like that was when my mother passed away, and my grandmother passed away, and my stepfather passed away. So when I began to understand like my fourth house, and like my fourth house with my family, and understanding that Saturn was moving through all of my energy in order to uproot, in order for me to be replanted, it didn't necessarily excuse the fact that all of those things were happening, but it definitely helped me to understand, like, I'm not a victim of the cosmos. I'm not just like this person who's a magnet for unfortunate experience. But when I began to recognize, like, what I believe is that when I incarnated into this existence, when I came forward into this existence, I made a conscious decision knowing that certain things would take place in my life that would begin to shape me as a person that shapes other people. So in order for me to be able to, like I said, like work with counseling and grief counseling, if I haven't been through grief myself, how do I relate to you? if I haven't dealt with, the demons of substance abuse and of fear and all of those things, to me, I feel as though I'm not very useful, because there's one thing to be about a textbook, but it's another thing to be like, like the legitimate life experience. So when I looked at it, like when I come forth as a Scorpio, I recognize that I'm coming forth to have a different type of experience than certain people will have. And so it's like, I could go through like my entire chart, but when I when I look at my chart and I'm able to understand some of the deeper nuances of it, I can understand that there will be events that happen. And as they happen, this is how I can best utilize this energy to either come to terms with what's going on or to affect what's going forward. Like even when you and I, when we talked about kind of at the beginning of the year, for me, rather than just kind of like working by word of mouth and with other people, I'm like, okay, this is the best time for me to begin to plant my energy, just because we were having a lot moving forward with Capricorn and that new moon energy. So it's like when you work with like what we call in astrology an election chart, and you look at how other things are aligning up in order to be the most prosperous time to do something, like that's what I'm utilizing. And so it's understanding that, the celestial bodies and their energy, that they have a particular resonance for a reason. A is understanding the reasoning, and B, it's understanding when to do things. Like if I tell you I don't want to say it like that, but it's like, you just know that there's a better time to do certain things based off of the energy that's present in the moment.
Right. So that leads me to my next question. You've been talking about a shift that's going to take place over the next few months or so. Some cosmic event that you mentioned to me before that's supposed to happen this summer. First of all, what can you tell us about that? And then, with regard to certain sun signs or moon signs or what have you, who's going to be affected by that the most? Those are my two questions.
Arguably, some of it has already started. And to put it like in the depths, it's technically the event date is going to be January 11th of 2020, but we're starting it this summer where we're getting closer and closer. Saturn is getting closer and closer to Pluto. Okay. And so it's like they're going to do what they call a conjunction, where they're like right on top of each other. And of the zodiac, there are arguably like the two roughest signs or deepest energies, or I'll be honest, like the two most fucked up energies that you can really have at the same time.
We want to keep it
Let's just take our hat off, okay? The two most fucked up like energies that you can have at the same time are Saturn and Pluto, okay? So it's like when you have those two in conjunction, which is what we're moving towards, that automatically starts to signal massive change, massive movement. The fact that this summer we're starting to have them on what they call the South Node, like another thing, and we can get back to it, but the South Node, like when you look at your natal chart and you see your South Node, you understand that that's your karmic imprint. Okay, so if you're a person who believes in past life energies and you want to know what your karma from past lives is, pay attention to your South Node. If you want to know what your destiny is, or what you're here to learn how to do, pay attention to your North Node, and they're diametrically opposed to one another. But with the South Node, we're going to have them this summer where we're going to have the South Node, we're going to have Pluto, and we're going to have Saturn, all three of them aligned. And when you have that type of alignment, that is like anything it can go so many ways, but where it's likely to go, because we had something really similar back in 2008, but we just didn't have it on the South Node. But when we had the financial crisis of 2008, that was when we had like a conjunction or an alignment with like Saturn and Pluto at that point. They just weren't meeting each other in this new karmic place that they're going to be starting to meet each other with this summer. So when we have that energy coming forward, that is is apt to definitely the economy, okay? There's a lot of people in the astrological community that have already started to talk about, like, even though it may not seem that because Trump has, arguably done such a great job with the economy, which to me is a lie, but the economy is going to have some issues. International economies are going to have issues. These are also the types of things that, because it takes so long for planets like Pluto to make a full transit, because it's actually doing a full transit, we haven't seen anything like this in like the last like 277 years. So the last time
affect our finances, or how is it going to affect us?
It's going to affect the economy. It's going to affect personal finances, and it's going to affect the economy. When you talk about it individually for each person, it becomes difficult to, it's not difficult, but I would have to look at your chart to be able to tell you like where this is going to lie. So unless I'm looking specifically at a chart, I have to kind of like be a little bit general with it. But generally those two, they're affecting economy. They're also going to bring out secrets, because when you have Pluto is kind of like this energy of like, it's the underworld. So secrets come up, and energies of life, death, and rebirth, like those types of things, like they begin to come up. And so like those are definitely things that we're going to be looking at come this summer. And again, it's going to be particular to each person. But when we look at kind of like on a massive global scale, like I'm not a doomsday theorist or anything like that, but we should be aware that things economically are going to happen. And these are the types of energies too where empires fall. These are the types of energies that, like where it doesn't always have to be bad. Because I mean, when you've had in the past, when you've had either Pluto being in a sextile or it being in a square with Saturn, things that have happened in times past, you've had everything from like World War I. You've had the with like back in 1865, that was where we emancipated slavery in the United States. Their conjunctions bring about major lasting changes. Saturn is about shit that's going to last, and Pluto is about things that are going to transform things as we understand them. So those two coming together, yeah, keep going, sis. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to ask, is that the same as the same thing that would happen when we go through our own personal transits? And Kamala, I'm curious, do you know like your sun, moon, and rising sign, all of that?
Who, me?
Kamala.
No, but when I get back home, I was gonna pull up my other phone and try to figure it out while he was talking.
Got you, sis.
Okay, I don't want you putting all your birthday and everything or whatever on here, but if you want to text it to me, I can look it up for you while we're talking. But I was asking.
I don't mind.
Oh, okay, well
I don't mind. I'm April 24th, 78. April 24th, 78.
Happy birthday! Do you
know?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you know what
I'm Taurus? Oh no, girl! I had to ask my mama. I don't know that.
Okay.
Time.
So the time is only useful for rising sign, right, Eric?
Essentially, because at like what's constellation was on the eastern horizon at your time of birth, and so which is helpful. You'll know house positions, but you won't always know like you said, like the rising and thereafter.
I'm curious if we can find out, like, so what are the most important placements to know about? Like, I know my Venus, and I know a lot of people talk about where their Mercury and all of that is. What are some things that that we should know about?
I mean, it's like, because I don't always mean to throw it back to other people, but it's what you want to know about yourself. Okay. If you're the type of person who wants to know, like, well, what type of relationship should I be in? Well, then, yeah, we need to know where your Venus placement is. And, what house is it in? Is it in a house of Aries, where this is something like you're the type of person who moves really, really quickly in love and you don't necessarily think it through, because you'll probably be very married very early? Or are you a person who has your Venus in a place like Capricorn? Like
that's me.
And and so it's like you are thought out, and you are somewhat austere about it, and you're not easily tricked into love, and you have a sense of discipline when it comes to it. And then you look at yourself as kind of like the mountain goat that goes about it slowly so that what you reap is something that you're proud of. And so it's like, I mean, I think so many people, especially, it's like when I talk about like being woke, like one thing that I personally believe is like we have to stop like measuring our lives to other people, because the one blessing that astrology gives to us is for us to recognize how unique we really truly are as individuals. Okay. So it's like when we can see our own uniqueness and we can see our own individuality, we can begin to come to terms with certain things like, okay, well, why wasn't I necessarily born with a silver spoon in my mouth? And why has it been so difficult for me to get money coming through? Like, what type of transits do you have going through your house? What type of, I mean, placements, it's not something that's set in stone. These are like moving energies. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, you might ask me like, well, what's the best time to drive? Or like, you know, like, what's the easiest way to drive to me? Well, you got to think about road conditions. You got to think about the time of day that you're leaving. You got to think about a lot of things. You got to pull a lot of stuff into consideration to just tell somebody something like that. And so it's just like, it's, I'll let you go.
I got a question. Kamala, were you born in St. Louis?
I was born in Kansas City.
Kansas City. Okay, so that makes sense. Actually, you know what, Eric, how much does the placement of where you were born matter?
And I mean, most people being born in the Western United States or being born in the United States, like, it's not hugely, to be honest. It helps, but not hugely, because I mean, if you were born in America, the sun is pretty much going to be, I mean, it's not going to move off 30 degrees that quickly. So,
okay.
Not hugely, but it's important.
Okay, I'm going to put it in anyway. Kansas City, Missouri, right? Missouri? I don't know if that matters. Kansas City.
Yeah.
Okay, and time unknown. All right, so it says, I'm going to give you her Venus sign. So maybe you can give Kamala some insight on her Venus. So her Venus is in Taurus, actually, and she's a Taurus. She has a moon in Scorpio.
Oh, wow. So I love that. And so having a Venus in Scorpio, so having a Venus in Taurus, you're a romantic person, you're grounded in love. And it's like for you, like you're the type of person who kind of like, you like to be spoiled in love and you like to spoil your lover. Like you're really into, like, to you, like a really good date is like, it's nothing like very quick. It's like at like a nice restaurant and like a nice ambiance. Things smell good. The food tastes good. There's like music. Like having a Venus in Taurus is all about sensory emotion. It's all about being grounded too. And so it's like you want to have a stable love. It's like you're the type of person where it's like you're committed. You're the type of person who kind of like, I don't want to say like does anything for your lover, but you definitely are practical about love and you take your love life very seriously. It's to you, it's kind of like love. It does intertwine with senses of money, and it also intertwines with senses of just kind of like, it's having all of it. It's like you want the romance and you want everything to be stable and financially stable. And it's like you like a good home life. And so far as like the comfortable surroundings and like a dependable, compatible partner, you like it's the rock. But then having like this moon and having your moon in Scorpio, I think what's interesting about people with moon and Scorpios is like they don't always like to be known very well. Like even kind of like, I'm almost surprised that you would agree to do this, because people with moons in Scorpio are generally a little bit like they're a little bit timid to kind of express themselves and to like put themselves on display. They have a tendency to be somewhat secretive people. They have a tendency to have like to be very private. with them, like the emotion runs really, really deep with a person who has a moon Scorpio. It's easy for you to be able to look at another person and to kind of put yourself into their shoes. Like you have this sense of compassion, yet it's also a sense of almost psychic understanding with people. But at the same time, most people would probably argue that you can be somewhat difficult to truly get to know because of the fact that you have like this Taurian energy on the outside. You are probably a very approachable person. You're probably a very sweet person. People probably tend to like, be attracted to you, especially like in work environments, because you just seemingly have this very laissez-faire, very like light-hearted energy about you. But when it's like truly getting to know you on deeper levels, that Scorpio moon is probably, it's kind of like you have very clear barriers of like, I will invite you over to my house, but you'll never go into my basement. Like there are certain doors that you just don't open. So it's just kind of like that's the emotional sense of just separateness that Scorpio moon people generally tend to carry. So, I mean, that's the way that I see them.
Sorry, I got kicked off for a moment, but I do hear a lot of the information. So.
Wow, I mean, that's actually pretty amazing. That's a lot of me, actually. I'm surprised that you said all that.
So let's find out a little bit.
Never had that done.
What else should we pull up? I said, let's find out a little bit more about Cam. So her Mercury is in Aries. What does that tell us about her?
She can actually, like a Mercury in Aries is a type of person where, because I also have to be careful about how I say things because I have a Mercury that's in Aquarius, and so I can be somewhat blunt. But a person, and she probably gets blunt really, really well because people who tend to have a Mercury in Aries are very blunt people, like almost outspoken. Like you're the type of person where it's like, if this is something that's on your mind, you're going to say it. And you're not necessarily thinking about that person's feelings that quickly. You're not thinking about the long-term consequences of what's been said. You're just the type of person who's like, well, this is what I have to say, so I'm going to go ahead and say it. It's not always the most calculated of languages. There have definitely been times where you have put your foot, your toenail, your mama's toenail into your mouth, and you're just like, okay. And then it's like, I think that because you also have that moon in Scorpio, you think about it after you've said it and you feel the emotion of what you've said after you said it. But again, because you have like that very fast moving sign of, what was it? It was that Aries and Mercury. You just speak quickly, and you speak quickly, and sometimes it feels abrasive, but it's generally from the heart. And so it's just like, you're like, okay, well, we'll deal with that later. But those types of people, no shade, no tea, but they're not the type of people who kind of like sit back, like you just respond quickly, and that's your MO. Like that's your modus operandi generally.
That's very much me.
Yeah, we found that out during one of our virtual, we had a virtual open, or what do we call it? Happy hour.
Happy hour.
We're on the happy hour, and she stops us in the middle of all of our conversation, and she's like, you know what? Someone needs to change their smoke detector battery, just like in the middle of the thing. So I thought that was funny. So yeah.
And I felt bad after I did it, but it was like I couldn't hold it in anymore. I'm very blunt. I am blunt.
Right.
Okay, cool.
And that's okay. And it's like, and also too, like, just because it's like, I do all of the shit. And so it's like, one thing that I'll say is that because you do have this moon in Scorpio, this weekend, sweetie, we're getting ready to actually have a full moon in Scorpio. Okay. So for you, I would just kind of say this week is going to probably be an intense week, okay? There's going to be a lot of energy that's coming to fore this week, just due to the fact that when we have a moon in Scorpio, things need to build a little bit, okay? And so because you also have that Mercury in Aries, I would just kind of like this week just kind of, I put more thought into what you say to certain people, because you probably already have situations where things are coming to the fore. Because when you are a Taurus, that means that this moon is kind of like exact opposite to you. And it being exact opposite to you, it has a tendency to pull out things in a Taurus. And then because you have this emotional state that's in Scorpio, you're going to have like a lot of your feelings like really compacted this week. And so like, I'm not necessarily sure if you have things that are kind of like going on with like your family life or things like that, or even in relationships, but you're going to have a lot of fiery energy where you're going to kind of like want to talk a little bit more probably aggressively than you used to stand up for yourself. And that's totally fine, but just kind of like be mindful that those types of things can have negative consequences that you may not really want to deal with. And then also too, it's like, just prepare yourself, because a lot of those things also mean transition. Because you're a Taurus, you've had Uranus move into your sign for like the first time in like 87 years. So for like minimally for like the last month or so, you've kind of had this like new energy that has started to like shift around with you. Insofar as like it brings unexpected changes. It brings unexpected movements. And it's like, for a lot of you Tauruses, it's affecting like the home and the living situation. So a lot of you have moved recently, or a lot of you have changed the way that you're living within your home. And it's kind of just brought changes about with that Uranus energy to like the home and the living situation. And so because this is an energy that's going to stay for like the next 7 years, you'll definitely kind of want to be a little bit like mindful of like the types of foundations that you're setting up for yourself right now. Because it's like with that moon in Scorpio, you can technically be a type of person who can like be annoyed, and when you're annoyed, you can, it builds up in you. And then you having that Mercury that is you having that Mercury that kind of again just spits things out in that Aries way. Just be mindful that as emotions build, that there is there's a not necessarily even just a high road, but there's a way that you can express yourself without being stinging. Because it's like, that's something that probably follows you a little bit. It's just like is stinging reactions. And then just like looking at some oracle cards, I do have home. That was like, it was funny that I just said home. That was a card that came out too. And so I'm not necessarily sure if there's anything going on there, and there might not be at all, but just kind of like watch that, because it's like, these are times where our energies are building and things are moving faster. And it's not to say that these are negative times, but these are energies that are going to come forward that begin to shift the way that we understand the world in which we live, because we're really creating new territories for ourselves.
So you mentioned that you just flipped over an oracle card. What's the difference between an oracle card and a tarot card?
The history, but to me, cards are definitely, they all read the energy. Okay, because that's all that we are. We're energy vibrating really, really fast. And so it's like when I open myself up to spirit to kind of talk to me, I utilize the oracle cards, because rather than using like the tarot, which has a really long history that goes back like well over 100 and some years, several hundreds of years, arguably, oracle cards aren't necessarily as, how would I say it? They both read the energy, but they do it differently. Because when we read the tarot, the images on the tarot and the history of the tarot and the way that the tarot has the major arcana, which are the power cards, or like the God force energy cards, and then it has the minor arcana, and then it breaks it down into what types of energy dealing with. And it's like that in itself is like, the history of tarot has a video that's like at least 3 hours for us to scratch the surface. So I'm not going to be able to get everything out. They both read energy, but the tarot cards are a lot more detail oriented, and the history that goes within the tarot is extremely it's brought from all types of cultures. It's brought from all types of like spiritual walks, rather it be Kabbalah to Christianity to, the pagans with the Romans and the Greeks. So much is brought inside. We're using numerology. We're using astrology. We're using so much to pull out the tarot.
I've noticed that
oracle cards. Right. There's so much to it. There's so much to it, but oracle cards are just